Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us on this Friday. He's Derek Gunn. I am Rob Ellis. We are thrilled to have our next guest on. Haven't spoken to him in a little bit. Get us all caught up on what's happening in the world of the Philadelphia Eagles and beyond. He is the Hall of Famer himself, the one and only.
There he is.
Ray Didinger. Raymundo, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, fellas. How are you?
Good to see you, buddy.
Ray, always good when you're on, my friend. Always good. Ray, before we get to the birds, I want to let everybody know this is very cool. So your book, One Last Read, has just been reissued in paperback, correct?
Correct.
There it is. Yes.
Now in paperback with an all new final chapter, which I wrote about, my decision to retire, such as it is, and also everything that happened in Philadelphia sports in the year 2022, which was merely a World Series and a trip to the Super Bowl. So I felt like the book sort of stands on its own, but I felt like I kind of needed to update it. So there's an additional chapter now that kind of brings us right up to today.
Excellent. And that's out now, Ray? People can get that right now?
They can buy it in bookstores now, or they can order it on Amazon. One Last Read, now the paperback. The original book came out in 2007. And what it is, it's a collection. Temple University Press asked me to pick my favorite stories from my 50 years of doing this stuff. Columns, features, magazine articles, the whole thing. So I compiled them all, gave them to them, and they published a really beautiful anthology and then republished it now as a paperback. So if people missed it the first time around, they can order it today.
That's perfect.
So Ray, I'm looking and it says the collected works of the world's slowest sports writer. Now, describe that, if you would, please. The world's slowest sports writer?
Oh yeah. Not even close. I mean, I was the slowest by leaps and bounds. Yeah. And I don't say that to brag. It was just I was a really, really, really slow writer. And my whole writing career, I worked for they don't exist anymore, but they were called afternoon newspapers.
Yeah.
Where, the Inquirer and the typical morning newspaper, your deadline is midnight. If you were working for the Philadelphia Bulletin or the Philadelphia Daily News, your deadline was 5 a.m. So, I mean, you could cover an Eagles game on a Sunday afternoon, and you had till 5 o'clock the next morning to file. And I often did. So it was just the way my mind worked. It was just, some guys can write, like Stan Hochman, Bill Lyon. Those guys were great writers, and they could write really fast. And I envied them because they could. I was the opposite extreme. I was the last guy out of the press box every single week. And
Ray, didn't you get locked in once? What was the story? It was like the Meadowlands or somewhere. Didn't you get locked in the press box? You were so late typing up a story one time.
Rob, I got locked in every press box in the National Football League. I mean, there were, of the 32 stadiums, I got locked in every single one of them at one time or another, because they would just assume, it's a 1 o'clock game, and they would just assume by 1 o'clock the next morning, certainly everybody's gone. So they would just turn off the elevators, turn off the lights, and go home. And meanwhile, I'd still be upstairs, only halfway through my story.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I knew every fire escape and back door and fire exit, and in the NFL, that's really true. I got locked in every single stadium in the NFL at one time or another. I had, I guess my worst experience was the old Orange Bowl, which I don't even think still stands, but the old Orange Bowl. It was after a Monday Night Football game back in the glory days of the Dolphins. The Shula, Larry Zonka team back in the early 70s. They played a lot of Monday Night Football, and I went down there to cover one of the games. And I got locked in that stadium, locked in the Orange Bowl way after everybody was gone. And it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I come down and every gate's locked, and I had to climb over the cyclone fence.
Oh my goodness!
over the barbed wire, which there was barbed wire around the stadium at that time.
God.
Carrying my briefcase and my typewriter.
Oh.
Did you ever miss?
Those are the things they don't teach you in journalism school.
No, you didn't learn that at Temple. No.
Did you ever miss any deadlines?
What's that?
Did you ever miss any deadlines?
I never did.
Wow.
I mean, I bumped up against it almost every night, but I never missed one. I never missed an edition. I never did. The closest I ever came was Game 7 of the 1979 World Series, Pirates, Orioles, down in Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. Willie Stargell night. Remember,
We Are Family.
He
Yeah.
capped off that MVP season,
Right.
hit the game-winning home run. And I wrote a Willie Stargell column, and I made the mistake of going back to the hotel to write it because I figured, I have a lot of time.
Right.
And I went back to the hotel to write my story and totally lost track of time. And all of a sudden, I began hearing this noise outside the hotel, and I realized it was rush hour traffic.
Ooh.
It was and the light was starting to stream in, and I stood, and the phone rang, and it was the editor calling to say, did something happen to you? I said, no, I'm ready to file. And actually, that's where the title of this came. What I said to him was, I'm just giving it one last read before I see it. And I sent that story. And I made deadline by that much. So if you were going to miss deadline, why not miss it on the 7th game of the World Series?
Yeah, really.
Jeez. That's awesome. And by the way, for everybody, Ray and our buddy Glenn Macnow will be at the Uptown Theater in Westchester this Tuesday at 7:00 to talk about the book and preview the Eagles' upcoming season. So tickets are still available for that, right, Ray?
That is correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
come on out. Uptown Theater right there on High Street in Westchester. It's a really nice place.
Very
in
cool.
fact, we're bringing Tommy and me there in September. So
Nice.
So you can come on out and catch Glenn and me on Tuesday night and buy your Tommy and me tickets all at the same time.
And Tommy and Me is, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, an entirely new cast too. You guys went a different direction, right? This time?
That was the run in Bucks County.
Okay.
Bucks County wanted to do their own version of it, so they hired an all new cast.
Okay.
But we're going to Westchester with the original cast.
Oh, good. Okay.
Which is
Good to hear.
all the guys that both of you saw
Yep.
when we were doing the show back in Philadelphia.
Nice.
They're coming back for the Westchester run.
Awesome. All right. Well, look, that's great. Love to hear it. A lot to get to. We haven't had a chance to really talk to you about the upcoming season. Let me start with this one, Ray, because I posed this to Derek earlier this week. If there's an area you want to see Jalen Hurts improve upon, what would it be?
I would probably it would probably be in the area of running less. I think it's a less is more kind of thing with him. I think he has improved enough as a passer and his ability to make plays from the pocket that I would like to see him run less. I'd like to see him take fewer hits. I'd like to see him be at less risk because I think we all know this team's going to go as far as he can take it.
Yep.
And I understand that the running is a big part of his game, has to be. That's what makes this offense special. But I thought there were times last year when I just thought he's running too much, and he's pretty good at protecting himself. He's pretty good about knowing when to get down. He's pretty good about knowing where the sideline is. But there are always those couple of hits a game where you just sort of hold your breath and hope he gets up. And I'd like to keep those to a minimum because he really has his improvement as a quarterback, as a passer, is remarkable. I mean, the growth that he showed last year and his ability to settle in the pocket, read the defense, and deliver the ball accurately and on time. It was a leap from here to here last year. So I think he's got to that point now where he doesn't have to be, because I don't know that he's ever really been a scrambler as much as he's been a runner by design. But I think I would like to see him do less of that and have an opportunity to get through a season and into the postseason 100% healthy.
Ray, the last NFC team to lose the Super Bowl and get back the next year, you got to go all the way back to 74-75 Vikings.
Yep, Fran Tarkenton and Bud Grant.
That's right. With the strength of this schedule and so many uncertainties on this defense this year, why can't this Eagles team be the exception to that rule?
That's a really good point, Derek. And I've whenever people ask me about the Eagles going back this year, because they are very good. They really are a good team. I mean, last year was no fluke. They're good, and they could do it. But what I try to tell people is exactly what you said. That's exactly the history that I point to. Yeah. And what I say is understand how hard that is. You know, it's easy for the fan to say, oh, we were there last year. We'll go back. You know, we're going back. You know, sure. Well, you know, the last team that did it, Fran Tarkenton was under center. You know, and Nixon was in the White House. I mean, it was, it was that long ago. So understand this is a tough ask. And there have been really good teams in there in between that couldn't do it. So understand what that challenge is. But you're right. And it's for all the reasons they're facing this team. You know, you pointed it out, Derek. It's a really tough schedule. And that's the league sets it up that way. If you won one year, you're going to get a tougher schedule the next year. That's just the way it works. Chances are pretty good. If you went to a Super Bowl, you're going to lose a couple coaches. Somebody's going to come in and hire them away. That happened too. You're going to lose valuable players to free agency. That happened too. So all of those things, that's kept other teams, really good teams, from going back that next year. And that's what the Eagles have to overcome. And then there's the other factor that I have talked to many, many, many players that have been in this position, that have lost a Super Bowl and have to come back the next year. Great players that were on great teams that couldn't do it. And when you ask them why, they tell you emotionally how hard it is to get over that loss. I remember when I was at NFL Films, doing an interview with Kurt Warner and him talking a lot about how hard that was to lose the Super Bowl. He'd won one, obviously, but then he lost another one. And he said that the emotional toll that takes on you to have fought your way all the way through the season, fought through the regular season, fought through the postseason, all the tough games, climb that mountain, get to the Super Bowl, and then you lose it, especially in the manner in which the Eagles lost it. And then you just get knocked all the way back down. And now you're at the bottom of that hill again. And now you're going to spend the next 6 months of the offseason with everybody saying, what happened? You should have won. That's what you hear for the next 6 months. And then you come back to training camp, and the reality is now you're looking up that mountain. And now you got to start climbing it all over again. And I don't know that the fans really can stop to consider how hard that is to fight your way back up there, to get that chance again, considering that all the other teams in your conference, they've spent this whole offseason studying you. And the things that you were successful with last year, they've spent 6 months trying to take all those things away.
That's right.
There's a lot of things in this Eagles offense last year, largely because of Hurts and the weapon that he is, that teams weren't prepared for. I mean, you saw it week after week. They just weren't prepared for a lot of that RPO stuff and his ability to execute it. Well, they've now had a whole off season to study it, and they've been studying it. So a lot of stuff that came maybe a little easy for you last year ain't going to be easy this year. So you put all of those things together, and that's why it's hard to do what the Eagles are trying to do this year. Now, they have enough good players that I think they can do it, but I just caution the fans who think, oh, yeah, sure, we're going back. Understand how hard it really is to do that.
Yeah.
I think I agree with everything you just said, Ray. I think one of the positives, at least, or the advantages the Eagles have, a lot of times what you see after either a team wins it or gets there and loses it, an example is the Eagles after Super Bowl 39 and T.O. just kind of losing his mind. There don't appear to be a lot of distractions, right? I mean, this appears to be a pretty focused team. I mean, you have a nice combination of Hurts, who's like the ultimate, what the target is, not worried about all the other outside noise, and older guys like Kelsey and Lane who are like, man, we want to get one before we hang it up, and we know we're on the back nine. I think that does help this group.
I think it does. I think if you look at the composition of the team, I think it's a very good blend of veteran players and young players. I think you've got a really good core of good, solid veterans who are really good leaders. And I think this is one of the things that's really good with this team, and in a way reminds me of the Vermeil team. is that Vermeil always stressed this, and I never really thought about it until he mentioned it, but what he said was very true. He said, we're really lucky in that our best players are also our hardest workers. And our best players are also our best leaders. You can have really good players on your team, really good players, but if they're not particularly setting a great example every day in practice or in the locker room, that's not good, because the young guys are going to take their lead from them. But if you look back at the Vermeil teams, his best players, his stars were the hardest workers. And that carried on through the whole team. I mean, that just trickles down through the whole team. Because if you're a backup player, how are you not going to work as hard as the all-pro that's ahead of you?
Yep.
And so, I mean, and those veterans set that example and that tempo every single day. This team is a lot like that. I mean, you mentioned it, Rob. Guys like Kelsey and Lane Johnson. Those kinds of players are not just your best players, but they're also your hardest workers and the guys who have the best focus on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a tremendous advantage that this team has, is it has those veterans and it has that kind of leadership. And I also think among the young guys that are coming up, I think you also have some pretty good leadership there too. I mean, you have guys, everybody kind of jokes about all these Georgia guys, but listen, those Georgia guys, if they know one thing, they know how to win.
Yep.
Okay. And they have won together. And Nakobe Dean has not really had a chance to show what he can do in the NFL. But I sure as heck saw what he could do in college. And he has tremendous leadership skill. And this year, I mean, he's going to be on the field often enough and long enough to be able to demonstrate that.
Right. Rob brought up that 04 team. As good as that 04 team was, a lot of the pundits picked them to go back at 05. And one of the biggest criteria was staying healthy.
Right.
And that 05 team was decimated by injuries outside of T.O. losing his mind. This team was so healthy. It was such a rarity to be this healthy going into a Super Bowl. Now you're playing not only a tougher schedule, but everybody's looking at you as their Super Bowl game. So sidestepping that injury bug, I think, sits at the top of the hill in terms of how do you get back and get another shot at that moment in the sun?
Sure. That's a big part of it, Derek. It really is. I mean, the team coming off Super Bowl 39, McNabb was hurt. You lost T.O. halfway through the season. And they had injuries all over the place. I mean, that was a team that went from the Super Bowl to 6-10. I mean, they didn't even sniff the postseason that year. If you look at all the Eagles teams that have been to the Super Bowl, I mean, if anybody's got any institutional memory knows the next year was never easy for any of those teams. The Vermeil team coming off the Super Bowl 15, they came back the next year. They started off 6-0, and it looked like they might run the table. And then they got some injuries, and then they started bogging down, and then they were really huffing and puffing down the stretch. They made the playoffs, but they got knocked out in the first round. Then you got Andy's team that got wiped out with injuries, didn't even make the playoffs. And then you had the Eagles team that actually did win it and then came back the next year and had a very turbulent, up and down, bumpy kind of year that they kind of regrouped. And at the end, they finished strong and they got to the playoffs. And then they win the double doink game that gets, but then they go out the next round. So you've had 3 times that the Eagles have been in this position coming off a Super Bowl. Sometimes you win 1, you lose 2. But in no case was that next year an easy year. And in no case did that take you back to where you wanted to go. So it just sort of underscores, for all the different reasons we've talked about, why it's really, really hard to do this back to back.
Ray, if you assume Niners, Cowboys, who's next for you in the NFC in terms of best teams? I'm assuming Eagles, but Eagles, Niners, Cowboys, who's next?
Yeah, that's the way I would stack it. Who would be next? The Lions are getting better, but I think people are getting a little carried away with the Lions thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people's look, the Lions are certainly better now than they were for a decade or more.
Yeah.
they're certainly, you can see they're putting it together and they're moving in the right direction.
Yep.
I just don't know if, like, right now they're quite where a lot of people think they are. I mean, we got a lot of people that are just penciling them into the postseason, like right now, and I'm not 100% sure of that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're certainly getting better. Could be Seattle. Could be Seattle. I think that we all have our different opinions on Geno Smith, and I'm not the biggest Geno fan, certainly, but he played very well last year. Now, can he do that 2 years in a row? I don't know, but I think that I think you're going to see a bounce back with Seattle, and I think that when you look at the Eagles' schedule, they have that stretch of games coming off their bye,
tough,
which is a really tough stretch. I mean, you got Buffalo, you got the Chiefs, you got the 49ers, you got the Cowboys, and then you got Seattle in Seattle. And the Eagles have terrible trouble with Seattle. I mean, the Seahawks have just been really tough for them.
And the Eagles, historically,
especially out there.
Yep.
I mean, the Eagles haven't won in Seattle. I think since Zorn was playing. I mean, it's
Steve Largent and Zorn. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Eagles haven't. I'm stretching a point to make a point, but the Eagles have had a really bad history going out and playing in Seattle, and now you're going to have to play them out there again this year at the tail end of that other stretch of brutal games. So that's going to be tough too. I kind of think I kind of look for Seattle to be a team that I think a lot of people are kind of writing them off, and I wouldn't. I think they might bounce back this year.
Yeah. Hey, Ray, when you look at the defense in particular, they're going to have 7 new starters on this defense compared to last year.
Right.
Give me one in which you're going to really be watching closely.
Oh, Dean.
Okay.
Dean. Yeah. Because I think I think Carter's going to be very good. I think Carter's going to be very good right from the start. Davis, you want to see more from him than you did last year, but I think you will. I thought that last year, it looked to me at least, that he was really coming on, and then he suffered that injury, and that really set him back, and he never really quite got back on it. But I thought it looked to me, before he hurt his ankle, it looked to me like he was starting to really put it together. So I think he'll be fine. But I think Dean is a real key here. I mean, he was – I just loved watching him in college. I mean, I really loved that whole Georgia defense. And to me, he was really, even though you look at that defense, and that was full of a whole bunch of guys that turned out to be first-round draft picks in the NFL. I mean, it was a blue chipper upon blue chipper upon blue chipper. But yet, when you watch that team play, the guy who was the catalyst and the guy who was the leader on that team was Nakobe Dean. And week in and week out in the biggest games, I mean, you had all those number 1 picks. We're all looking at Nakobe Dean saying, "What do we do now, boss?" So, I mean, I think he has that kind of ability. And so even though I know there's some questions about his size and his ability to make the transition up here, I think he's going to step in and play really well. And if he's as good as I think he can be, he will probably give you something in the linebacker position that they haven't had for a while, which is a true playmaker there. I mean, he's a guy that's around the ball a lot and makes a lot of plays. And I'm not just talking about tackles, but I'm talking about the guy that makes plays that kind of turn games around. That's the kind of player he was in college. I think he can be that kind of player here too, but obviously he has to demonstrate it. So if you're asking which of the new guys am I really got my eye on defense, I would say it's Nakobe Dean, because I think he has a chance to be really special.
Ray, how about the impact of the new coordinators? It's hard enough replacing one, but two, and I get it. Brian Johnson was already in-house, and Desai has, comes from the same branch, I guess, if you will, as Jonathan Gannon. But, it is 2 new guys in there for sure, and play calling and all those kind of things come into effect.
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about the offense, because I really do think the offense is going to be – I think it's going to be Nick's, I mean, Johnson's going to take the role of offensive coordinator, and he'll certainly be able to put his stamp on it. But it's going to be Nick's offense, so I think that I don't think you're going to see much change there. Desai, you might, because as we've talked about a lot, I mean, you're going to have a lot of new players. I mean, you just got to work a lot of new players in there who have a different kind of skill set, and it's going to be up to this defensive coordinator to to find out what their talents are and what's the best way to utilize them. We're going to evaluate him on a week-to-week basis and compare him to Gannon. Is he more aggressive? Is he less aggressive? Is he the same? Or the coverage is going to be the same? Does he blitz enough or doesn't he blitz enough? I mean, all of that stuff that we're going to look at and evaluate it and parse it week to week. But it's going to start with the right now, which is him just watching these guys, because he's coming in from the outside. He's not in-house. He's coming in from the outside. So he's got to figure out what he's got with the veterans, but he absolutely has to figure out what he's got with a lot of these young guys. And now he's got to put it all together. I think the bigger question is really what's going to happen on that side of the ball. And it's the new players, that's part of it, but also how does decide, okay, this is the best way to deploy these guys. And me as a teacher to get that across to them so that we're all on the same page come Sunday. And, I think that, I feel this offense is going to be dynamic again. I'd be shocked if this was not the highest scoring offense in football this year. I mean, I really think they're going to score a ton of points. The defense, I think, is going to probably take some time to get together. I think probably it's going to be a 5 or 6 week kind of trying to figure out who we are and what we're doing. And then the second half of the year, when the schedule gets tougher and you start moving towards the playoffs, then I think they'll have time to get this whole thing together. But the first half of the year, I think it's going to be kind of a work in progress on that side of the ball. But the good news is I think they're going to score enough points that they'll probably be able to deal with that.
Ray, don't you think it's a weird dynamic? You have a new defensive coordinator, and they bring in a former defensive coordinator as the coordinator's consultant. You bring in Patricia to decide who's your coordinator. That's a weird dynamic, isn't it?
It is. It is. And just, there are a lot of people who are still scratching their head and trying to figure out what Matt Patricia's doing here. Because of, there's the whole Eagle Patriot history, which we know. The Eagles fans are used to seeing him standing next to Belichick with the pencil behind his ear. He's always been that guy. So you kind of got to get over the fact that he's now one of your guys. But I think that and everybody, of course, remembers what a disaster things were when he went to Detroit, and that whole thing just imploded. And then last year he goes back to New England, and they try to, like Juan Castillo him and put him on the other side of the ball. How that went. So, look, the last couple of years have not been good for Matt Patricia, okay? I'm not going to try and say they have. But what the Eagles are asking him to do now is kind of just what he was successful at before, which is just be an assistant coach on the defensive side of the ball. And we've seen that he was pretty effective in that role. And, if I don't know where, everybody's saying the right things about the relationship between he and Slay. I mean, it's a matter of public knowledge that they did not have a happy time in Detroit. Where does that stand now? I mean, they're both saying that's forgotten. It's all behind us. Maybe, and we hope that it is, but we'll see about that. But I have to admit, when they announced they were hiring Patricia, I was a little surprised. But, I know in football circles, the regard that he had back when he was calling defenses with Belichick, he was very well thought of by people around the league. Now you're asking him to just go back and kind of do that again. And, let's see. Let's give it a chance and see if it works.
Ray, last one for me. I know how in-depth you go on the draft and how much you pay attention to college football. What do you think about Nolan Smith? How do you see him now? How do you see him projected? What did you think about where they got him at 30? Just give me your breakdown of Nolan Smith.
It was, first of all, Howie had a great draft. I think, A+, it really was. And that was part of it. Getting him at the bottom of the first round, I certainly never thought he would go beyond 12, 13. I thought he was right in the middle of the first round. And when he fell and the Eagles got him where they did, I was amazed, but good for them.
Yeah.
He's really good. He's really good. There aren't many guys his size that can move the way he can move. And he's if you watched him play in college, he's just I don't like to use this word because it has a bad connotation, but he's a violent player, and I mean that in a positive football sense. I mean, he plays with that kind of edge. He plays with that kind of ferocity. He plays at that speed. And you're talking about a 235-pound man that runs the way he can run. I know there's some people think, well, he's not quite big enough. No, the way he moves, he's plenty big enough. And he's even at that size. It's not just a fast 40, which everybody saw at Indianapolis, but he's so quick off the ball. At that moment when the ball moves, he's already up the field. I mean, in college, he beat blockers without it being touched.
Right.
I mean, he was so quick off the mark that he was around the edge and in on the quarterback before the offensive line moved. I mean, that's the kind of speed that he has, and that's the kind of speed of which he plays. And I think he's a very comparable player to Hassan Reddick. I think in terms of his size and also the way that he plays. Now, this also gets back to your question about the defensive coordinator. How does Desai use those guys? Does he back up Reddick, or do you build your defense with the idea that you want both of those guys on the field at the same time, working on different edges? That's for the coach to find out. But there's no doubt in my mind that he can come in and be a guy that's going to play a lot of snaps and be a guy that's going to be an impact player, I think, right away.
Mm-hmm. Ray, great catching up with you. Appreciate the insights. And I tell everybody, go get the book. Go get the book. One last read. Show it to him one more time, Ray. We get to see your handsome face on the cover there. We need to see that again. So one last read. Ray Didinger.
There you go.
Paperback edition.
Collection of my favorites. Yeah, one of the with the final chapter that kind of updates last year. And one thing I would say in that final chapter is I write a lot about my decision to step away from full-time broadcasting. Okay. That's a big part of it, how I arrived at that and what happened and thought. But one of the best things that came out of it was an amazing email. I got a million emails, obviously, but an amazing email I got from none other than Michael Jack Schmidt.
Wow.
When the day I announced my retirement, I got home and there was an email from Mike Schmidt, who, I did not have the warmest of relationships with him when he was a player and I was a writer. Mike kept his distance from the media to a fair degree, but he wrote me a really great email wishing me well and talking about his relationship with the press then and his relationship and how he viewed the press today. It was very revealing. And I write about that in the new book too, so people can find that.
That's cool. That is cool.
That's awesome,
yeah, I love that. Let me ask you, just speaking of that, Ray, you follow everything. Your thoughts on the Phillies? Like what they've had some tough gut wrenching kind of losses, but they've put themselves in a position where they're right there in terms of the wild card. What do you think?
Yeah, they're going to the playoffs. I mean, I don't think there's no doubt in my mind they're going to the playoffs. I've felt that all year. And I'm not saying that they're the world's greatest team, but are they one of the 6 best teams in the National League? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And over the course of 162 games, you were going to see that. I think the addition of Lorenzen is a really good one. I think it really bolsters the pitching staff. And I know everybody's all hung up on Trey Turner, and I can't sit here and explain to you why it's all gone wrong for this guy. But I mean, anybody that's followed his career and all the places he's played, how good he is. Yeah. And right now, what he's dealing with is all up here. Yeah. And he's just got to find his way through that. But, they're going to get to the postseason. I mean, they've got coming up for a homestand here where they got Kansas City, Washington, and Minnesota. So they'll blow through that. I mean, 11 games, they'll 9-2. I mean, there'll be 17 games over 500 by the time they go on the road again. And then if you look, if they really need to finish strong, you look at their last 10 games now. Their last 10 games are against the Mets, who have been gutted, and the Pirates. So, I mean, they're set up now that, they'll be in the postseason. And who knows? Maybe it'll be one of those years when Trey Turner struggles the whole regular season and then comes out and hits 480 in the postseason. And everybody will forget everything that happened in April and May.
Right. Would you let Trey Turner sit for a series? See, Rob said 1 or 2 games. I said They're about to play Kansas City. They could beat Kansas City with the scrubs. I would let Trey Turner sit the entire series just to sit, watch, think, observe, and work on the little fundamentals and mechanics that have been plaguing him.
Well, he's working on it. I mean, you've heard all the people that are around the team say he's in the batting cage before every game and after every game. I mean, he's just trying to work it out. We know he's a better player than that. The amazing thing is, if you go back to the World Baseball Tournament that back in March, he was, other than Ohtani, he was the best player in that whole tournament. And so, I mean, you figure, man, that's going to be a springboard. He's going to come to Philadelphia and light it up. And it's all going south for him. But I mean, we know what kind of player he is. He just has to, figure it out. Maybe it is a matter of sitting a few days. I don't know, but I feel confident he'll find it. And you know what? Like I said, I'd bet anything that they're going to be in the postseason. I have no doubt they're going to be in the postseason. And if that's where he finds it, then all's well.
I hear you. Hey, Ray, thank you. And best of luck with the latest run of Tommy and Me, and of course with the book. And yeah, Tuesday night, yourself and Glenn, and you'll be discussing the book, not only the book, but you'll be talking Eagles, kind of mixing and matching everything there at the Uptown Theater in Westchester. That'll be at 7:00. Ray, we do appreciate that. Thank you very much for taking.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Always a pleasure to hang with you guys. Have a great day.
All right, Ray, take care. That's Ray Didinger.
Bye-bye.
Great. He's the best. He is absolutely the best. All right, let's get a timeout, Gunner. We'll come back, and we will set our sights on the Phils a little bit here. They win yesterday. They take 3 out of 4. They're actually set up really well in terms of not a whole lot of travel here in the entire month of August, which we'll get into in a second here. And then coming up at 1:30, we'll have Bill Colarulo. We'll talk to him about the Birds and his new podcast. And then we have our NFL segment. The greatest today is the Texans. So we'll talk about that. Birthdays, movies. Don't go anywhere. Some news in the Pac-12 as well, which we will pass along when we get back also. That's Derek. I'm Rob. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let's talk about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because finding that right person, that person that you can trust, is difficult. It can be a real challenge, right? Because you work too hard to not have yourself set up and your family set up later in life, whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review. You might have a small business and you're trying to get your employee benefits set up. Jim can help you with that as well. I know personally, I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollovers with Jim, and I couldn't be any happier. You will be too. Give him a call. 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You could also email him, Murray, MURRAY.Jim@principal.com. That's Murray,